once again. Now the participant number is increasing, but let's start with the introduction part then. So I would like to welcome you all once again to this week's webinar, which will be TROIA Development Platform. So let me introduce myself before we start. My name is Ersan, and I work for IAS Business Academy as a training specialist. And today, our guest presenter will be Levent Tutcu. So Levent, welcome. How are you then?
I'm good, Ersan. I'm here. My camera is open, but I can't see myself. Is it something to do with me, or is it?
Okay, so just let me check before we start. Okay, so how are you, Levent?
I'm good. Just like we discussed a minute ago, just did the last bit of preparations for this webinar. You know, I'm good. Everything is fine. So we'll see. Just yeah,
sounds perfect then. So let me just share a few points before we start, because these notes are important for the success of the session. So before we start, I would like to share a few points. So the first one is, please ask your questions through the chat section that we have in the Zoom. So I will be following through the session as Levent is presenting the theme. And all the questions will be answered in the QA part that we will have in the end of the webinar, in the last session of the webinar. And for those who are wondering, this session is being recorded right now, and the recorded session will be edited and will be shared on our YouTube channel after the session. And also microphones will be off during the webinar to avoid any kind of buzzing or any kind of voice related issues. If you have any problems, please share the problem with us directly from the chat section. Or if you have any problems with the session in general, you can also share it with us through our email address, which is iba@canias4.0. And your feedbacks are highly appreciated. So please don't forget to fill in the webinar survey that we sent after the session. And let me also share the details about the timetable. This session, we started at 2 o'clock as we planned actually to the session. And then in the first part, we will go ahead with the introduction and the TROIA platform elements, the basics. And then we will have the break. And then in the second part, in the second session, we will go ahead with the basic language elements and the development details. And then we will have the QA part in the end. So after I share the timetable for this webinar, I would also like to introduce IAS Business Academy. As the organizer of this webinar, IAS Business Academy, together with its continuous improvement mission and with the new structure, keeps moving forward fast with a lot of projects. And this webinar is also one of the products of those projects. To summarize what we do in the Academy, actually, IAS Business Academy provides the trainings for Canias ERP. That is our main ERP software product. And the trainings are designed for both end users and expert users in order to minimize the issues that might be faced while switching to an ERP solution in a company. So with the trainings, all the users become competent in using Canias ERP in various ways, so that they can start to work on Canias ERP right away without losing even a second. So besides all the module trainings that we have in the Academy, we also provide other trainings such as full cycle, digital transformation, TROIA, which is our own development platform and also the topic of this webinar, and then IAS DB, which is also our own database, Canias IQ, and IoT, which allow a company to digitally transform and institutionalize it all. So you can visit our website, which you can see on the presentation right now, and reach further information about our trainings, their content, and our calendar. And you can even submit your requests through the training request section on our website. Or if you would like to get in touch with us directly, you can also email us iba@canias4.0. You can also follow our works and on LinkedIn and also on the Instagram. And last but not least, Canias ERP YouTube channel. All the training, all the webinar recordings are edited and shared on our YouTube channel. And this session will also be edited and shared on our Canias ERP YouTube channel. you can find all the recordings in IBA on Zoom playlist. So after I actually introduced the Academy a little bit, I think now the participants are also wondering you. So can you please also introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. Hello again, everyone. I am Levent. I am working as a training specialist in IAS Business Academy. I'm mostly responsible for the technical modules like TROIA, BPM, OLAP, canias4.0, and that sort of more technical stuff. So, and today we will be talking about the TROIA programming language. But like we discussed before the webinar, I mean, in 2 hours, I will try my best to just put everything together. It's probably going to be like a bit like a David Lynch movie. It won't make any sense at the beginning, but bear with me because I had to just put pieces, divide them into pieces, and then we'll be going to just combine them all at the end. So, yeah. So this is how it's going to be today.
Okay. So sounds perfect, Levent. So yeah, let me also highlight it actually once again. So this is just a webinar. So this is not a complete training, and actually you explain all the details and teach the details of TROIA in the trainings in basic level and also expert level.
Yeah.
So
10
for
level,
all
10 days. Yeah, 10 days in total. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can summarize everything in just only 10 days into 2 hours.
Yeah.
Okay. So I will just allow you to have your say just in a second. But before that, I have a quick question to all the participants. And now I will just send the question to all of our participants. So there's a short survey for you. Now you will see a pop-up screen on your screens actually. And there are 3 questions, quick questions. So if you please fill in the form, that will be great. Okay. So thank you very much for your participation. And as I said, I'm not going to take too much time because we have a lot of content and the topic is quite important. So I will just stop my screen sharing and Levent, please have your say.
Okay. Let me quickly share my screen and start the presentation, and then from there on, can I just close this polling window, by the way? Is it because it appears on my screen as well, so it's fine if I just go ahead.
Just close it. So just close it.
Okay, that's fine. So let me share my screen.
Okay.
Can you see it now? Is it there?
Yeah. Okay. If you click present.
Let's have a look.
And it's perfect right now.
Okay. So should I just should I do it like this, or should it stay? Let me just press this. Hello again, everyone. Today we will be covering some essential elements of TROIA. First, we will analyze TROIA as a platform, the architecture, and the components that make up the whole system. Then we will be looking at fundamental elements of the language to provide some insight about the structure and the syntax of the language, just as much as we can. And then we will cover TROIA IDE to see how TROIA projects are implemented using our integrated development tool. We will be talking about this more in detail, but as you know, TROIA is an object-oriented language, and this webinar will be in that fashion as well. So it's going to be like an object-oriented webinar. So I will present fundamental components, and when you first hear it, it might sound quite detached, but please bear with me till the end because we will be putting the pieces together because there's no other way to reflect a platform, a programming language, and a development environment in 2 hours without dividing them in sections. So this is how it's going to be today. Like I said, in IBA, we give me and my team, I'll focus more on the technical trainings. And let me mention how we implement our TROIA trainings as well. First, we introduced this concept called Hotline, which we will cover as basic in a minute. Then after that, we design the tables and columns within these tables that holds the user data. Then we create the database scripts of these tables. We execute SQL commands. After that, we start designing the visual side or the front end of the application at TROIA IDE. We add buttons, the fields that expects input from the user. Then we associate these fields within with the areas in the table. Then we give functionalities to the components by adding TROIA codes inside them. We display the data that get returned from the database on a virtual table. So, I mean, I'm explaining these, but these are all really not complicated, but more detailed subjects. And then we design multiple dialogues. We use inheritance methods, we override methods. We explain the flags concept, which is also a very important subject in TROIA. Then we explain active records to understand how data in canias in general is being read and then written into the actual database. And then after that, we write methods. And that way we get to have an idea about the syntax of the TROIA language or the semantics as a whole. And again, if you are familiar with, even if you just have a little bit of idea about the programming and software development, you would easily figure out what is actually going on. So don't leave it here. I definitely recommend you to attend one of our training sessions, because it would be really beneficial to be able to understand what is actually going on with TROIA. So, but today's webinar will obviously not be like a training session, because I will literally introduce you some concepts about the structure, about the flow, and we'll mention some aspects of the language, and then we'll introduce you the TROIA IDE screen just to give you an idea, like visually, just to visualize how it is being implemented, to see how TROIA applications are being developed. So today, again, in the first part, we will be looking at the backbone or the back end of the mechanism, which is made up of layers or parts or components like client, server, and database components, which are really important and fundamental topics. And then we will cover the language basics, but just briefly going to explain which data types we use in TROIA language, which ones we support. And I'm going to show you some code examples, and then just gonna jump right into the how the front end part is implemented. So, but basically in the most simplest form, with TROIA applications, we aim to manipulate data with the decisions made by the user, handled by an application server, and saved and stored in a database. So this is literally the basic and the logic behind TROIA. Like I said, we have this client side, and in the middle we have the application server or the server layer, and then we have the database part, and they just work in harmony to fulfill the user's needs, to execute the operations that are requested by the client or the user. And before we get into details, actually, I just put like a screenshot here. I mean, this is the screenshot for sales document management, but I wanted to use it as an example. And I'd like to use a scenario as an example here. So we have this client concept, which I will just kind of mention a bit more in detail in a minute. But basically, a client is a user or a device that has access to a service. What I mean by service in our scenario, the service is canias ERP system, right? And you're a client as well when you are logging in the system. And let's assume we have different types of clients. We will cover in a minute. But let's assume for now that you are a desktop client. And how we do it, we download a JNLP file, right? And then a login screen appears right in front of us. We enter our username, our password, and then we select the database that we are willing to connect to. And then we go ahead and click the connect button, right? So what is actually going on so far is you are literally sending a request to a server to gain access to the system, to access to the service. But why did I use this as an example? Because when we think about software, we think that some codes are running in my device and all that sort of stuff, but actually no codes, no software blocks whatsoever is running on your side. So this is a really important concept because it just kind of gives you some idea about the architecture. So when you're developing your projects, it is a good, I mean, it's really important to know this part. So on the client side, no codes are running. Everything is being handled by the middle section, which is the application server. All these TROIA codes read, compiled, run, executed, interpreted in the application server in the middle, and then accordingly goes to the database tables, fetches the relevant data, and generates a response to the user. So basically, this is what TROIA is all about. So obviously, we need to know how to code in TROIA language and everything, but this is a really important structure to know about. So that's why I wanted to give you as an example. So if we just kind of continue with this example on the screen, but also let's say there are other mechanisms working in the application server layer. Let's say when I click the connect button, I just don't simply just dive right into the system. The server receives your request, goes to the license server to check the validity of your login credentials. And if you're a valid user, the server grants you access to the system. After that, the homepage appears. In this example, on the screen, I use the sales management transaction. And let's assume on the homepage, you typed Salty01 in the search field, which is our sales management transaction. Again, the startup dialog appeared. On top, we have the search field where we enter our criteria. And then in the middle section, we have the control buttons like new button, edit button. And let's assume in this scenario, I want to display everything, all the sales documents for company A. And after obviously I have to enter the company name here in the CC area. And then I go ahead and hit the listing button, the binocular icon, which is our listing button. And then a virtual table appears underneath, which represents the actual data on the database. So this is the, how to say, the general flow of events in a TROIA, in a application written in TROIA. And why did I give this as an example? Because the structure is always kind of just based on this scenario. So this is how the events flow. This is how it's just like there's so much similarities between all these different modules and all these transactions. And in our training sessions, like I said, we develop an application in this logic. So what we do, we just first, actually, before we get into that, I want to mention something else. Because, like I said, I'm going to be skipping from subject to subject quite often. So all relevant data that I'm using in my application are being stored in a table somewhere in the database, we said, and the application server receives this data and generates a response to it. And I said in our example, company again corresponds to a column in a specific table. When I click the search button, I'm literally telling the system, fetch me everything, all the records within these given values are used as a parameter. In this scenario, I said I just entered company, I didn't enter anything else. So here I'm actually triggering an event. What does that mean? As a client, I am triggering an event which is just triggering other events. So it's a chain of events consecutively. So they're all connected to each other. Or in other words, I'm actually executing a server query. And we can see the whole canias or TROIA projects as like database applications, literally, because we are dealing with huge amounts of data. Huge amounts of data tables which are stored in the database. And as a user, I'm willing to manipulate them. And today we will be discussing how we do this in TROIA and how they are being implemented. For example, going back to the query scenario, if I'm clicking the new button here in the first document management screen, I'm literally executing an insert command in like SQL. What's the word? In terms of SQL, right? Or if I'm clicking the edit button, I'm literally executing the update command for that given table. And these, the visual sites, like these control buttons, are making it easier for me to execute these commands. But so obviously, like I said, it's not that simple, but the logic is more or less like this. And in our IDE, we identify these objects with corresponding tables, and we identify indexes, and we set them as key fields, or, you know, that's of so much details in there. It will, like I said, it will be more clear once we start analyzing the components one by one. So let me skip to here now. Here is like the overview of the architecture. As you can see, there are 3 different layers. So this is what TROIA is actually built upon. This is the architecture. This is the basis of the overall structure. And I'd like to start, instead of starting with the client, I'd like to start with the server layer, which is the heart of the system, which is the core of the system, which is a lot is going on there, so much different subcomponents and everything. Like I said before, the most important component on this layer is our application server. And what application server does, we will be covering it in a minute. There can also be more than one application server depending on the necessity. Like if, let's say, if you are, for example, if your company has 100 users, one application server could be enough for you. But let's say if you are dealing with loads of users, so you can add more than one application service, which makes TROIA quite scalable, which is a really, really important subject in ERP, because if your ERP system is not scalable, then you are very limited. So that means your ERP system can only handle 100 users, and after that, you don't know what to do. So scalability is really important. So being able to work with multiple servers is, again, really important. So Canias and TROIA supports this structure. So again, but it's all to do with necessity. If you have multiple users, then you can use more than one application server. As you can see in the diagram as well, application server acts as an intermediate between the client and the database layer, almost like a messenger. So what happens, the client, and what I mean by client is you or me or anyone who is using the system. So the client sends requests, application server receives these requests and runs the corresponding TROIA codes, fetches all the information from database, and generates a response to the user. Again, this scenario actually is working in this fashion. And like I said, there are many other components in this layer, but we wouldn't have enough time to mention all these one by one. For example, load balancer allocates available servers and just allocates the users to the available servers at that time. A license server checks the validity of the license of the user, etc. Just so much other components, but basically this is what's happening in the layer, server layer. So again, application server, we said manages user requests, reads the codes embedded under the user decision, interprets these codes, and fetches the relevant data from the database and presents the returned values to the user. It also manages the user sessions, for example, remaining logged in. As if you're a Canias user, you probably do know that, you know, when you're performing your operations, if you remained idle for a certain period of time, the system logs you out automatically. That is something that also being handled by the application server. So all these can be given as examples of management processes handled by the server layer. And all these I just mentioned actually are handled by the application server itself. So also, as you know, apart from being a platform, we said TROIA is also a programming language with its own syntax and semantics and its own structure. So, and we write these codes in our development environment, but these codes actually do need to run somewhere. So it's not going to run itself, obviously. So application server is also the part that these codes run. interpreted and also executed. So if we have a block of TROIA codes, the only environment that these codes executed and run is the server side. So no codes, I repeat, run on the client side at all. So this is the environment where TROIA codes are executed and recognized. And let's mention the client concept as well. As I just said, I need an application server for my codes to run, but I also need a trigger point which requests these codes to run. Okay, so okay, yeah, the codes are being read there, but I need something to trigger to start the process, how to say, to flow. Because, for example, it's not possible to log in an application server directly and run a TROIA application. I need an extra layer to be able to handle this situation. And that layer corresponds to our client. So we said we have this middle layer and we have our operations being handled here, but I need someone to initialize these events. And that someone corresponds to our clients. So client is literally a gateway to the system that initialize these operations. And this client can be a desktop client, it can be a web client or a third-party client. Again, I will not be going into detail. So regardless of the client type, application server fetches the user's request through buttons and controls and corresponding events, and then forwards these commands to the server. So when the server receives a request, it then runs the TROIA codes on the server side by matching this command with your session and your username and generates a response accordingly. So if, for example, if the client is a web client, the responses will be generated in a web client specific fashion. For example, if you're logged through web, an HTML file, HTML will be generated and sent to you as a response, and you will be viewing it in an HTML format. And so database server, that is a whole different seminar topic. There's, obviously, I'm just going to mention just the basics of it. And let me get to the, here on this next slide, we get to see some of the tasks performed by the application server and its management processes. So we said it's an intermediate between the client and database, made up of subcomponents like load balancer, license server, which fulfills specific tasks. And we said application server manages client requests, it manages user sessions, it manages application lifecycle, and database transactions and data manipulations. And it's also, we said, the environment where the TROIA codes run. So this is the core, the heart of the system, the most essential part of this whole TROIA infrastructure in other terms. And then we said we have the client layer. We said it represents the users that access to the system to perform some operations. And we said we have different client types. First being the desktop client, which is like a cross-platform device. It can be a Microsoft, it can be an Apple, Unix, or whichever device that you are connecting with. And then we have the web clients, which represents any device with a browser and with JavaScript support. And we can also access to the system by third-party applications using web services. So we explain all these in detail, in some of them in the end-user trainings and some of them in the expert level trainings. Again, we said client layer is... Yes.
So sorry, can you just take a step back, because you're quite close to camera right now?
Well, yeah, I really apologize for that, because my device's camera is located actually on the keyboard, so I keep losing track, and sorry about that. I can close it actually if it's a bad view. Would it be better?
So it's not about a bad view, but I think if you just take your seat a little back, then problem will be solved.
Okay.
If you can, absolutely.
Well, I'll try my best, but I'm kind of stuck in here, so because of
Okay.
the
So okay, it's
cables,
okay. Okay,
cables
so
and
it's okay.
everything. So
Okay then.
okay. And then we have the database layer. I mean, I just only put like two sentences here, but it's not that simple. Honestly, trust me. It is this, like I said, it's a whole different seminar subject. And we see the properties of the database layer. I'd like to mention cross-database concept here, which is also very important, and which is a very important option that TROIA offers to us. Because I mean, because as I'm not sure if you don't know, but TROIA runs on multiple different databases. So regardless of the database type, all the relevant data get interpreted and converted to a user's database type, which is a very important subject. There's probably the participants to know about these, and people who implemented ERP projects before probably do know about this. For example, let's say I'm using an ERP system which is running in a particular server. And then 2 years later, I decided to change my database type. Normally, that is a really painful task. You have to literally reinvent the wheel. You have to just go to the basics and start, building everything from scratch. I mean, it might sound easy, but it is not at all. You have to adapt all your data to the specific database type. But with TROIA, you don't really have to deal with any of these. Just literally a click of a button, and then you can convert your data set to the new database type that you are going to be using. This is a very important asset of Canias and TROIA in general. And I'm sure our users probably do know this benefit. And so here we see some important properties that TROIA has to offer. For example, we have abstraction of technical details here. And what we mean by abstraction, very important subject again. In other programming languages or low-level languages or like medium-level languages, you need to know all the technical details. For example, you need to know all the details to write a connection string to start a session with the database. In TROIA, you don't have to know about any of these details. When you write a certain keyword, the system knows exactly what it needs to be doing. And since that it supports like cross-platform and cross-database, it gives flexibility to be integrated for different scenarios, and the possibility to work with multiple servers makes it scalable. I mean, these are important subjects when it actually comes to the ERP scenarios. And then again, multi-language and time zone support is another important subject. And so these are the most fundamental properties that TROIA offer to its users and to its developers, literally. And our next subject is TROIA as a programming language. TROIA is, we said, is an object-oriented language. But apart from being an object-oriented language, it is a fourth-generation high-level programming language. And what we mean by that, and let me expand these concepts for those who are not familiar with. Let me explain high-level languages first, and then what we mean by fourth level, which is kind of how they go hand in hand anyway. High-level programming languages are almost like everyday conversation language. For example, let me give an example. If I want to run a condition in a code block in like older generation languages, I have to write so much obscure symbols and weird keywords and everything. But in high-level languages, it's almost like if this condition is met, then do this, or if not, do something else. Or another example can be select everything from this table and move them to that table. So it's almost literally, without any exaggeration, it's almost like this. So, but obviously you need to know about the algorithms to be able to write these things. So, but it's easy to understand, it's easy to read, it's easy to write, compared to obviously low level or middle level languages. And this makes the applications easier to read, easier to develop, and accordingly, identifying a problem when it occurs is a lot easier as well. So these are one of the most important aspects of dealing or working with high-level languages. It saves you time. It allows you to finish your projects a lot quicker than dealing with other languages, and it's the future language really. So obviously there are loads of other programming languages, like low-level languages, assembly languages, like machine-level languages, but it's not a wise thing to say that this language is the best or this is the worst, because each one of them have their own advantages and disadvantages. And normally you choose the language that you will be using in your projects depending on your needs. So let's say you are dealing with low-level hardware and you will be performing some simple tasks and just like basic hardware that you want to do something with. Then in that scenario, it will be unnecessary to do this with a high-level programming language because, what's the point? Or let's say performance is highly prioritized in your project. So, but then you wouldn't be coding your project with, for example, Java. I mean, we're not allowed to say names, but Java is like a universal language and it's not like a brand anymore. So, as you know, there are other different languages as well. And why did I give this as an example? Because as you know, for those who know, in Java, there are many abstraction levels. And that in return affects the performance in one way or another. So, so you wouldn't be choosing that sort of programming languages in your projects. But if the system is huge and highly complicated, and you're dealing with loads of data, loads of tables, and your system has many layers. So for that sort of scenarios, then you would be needing a high-level language instead of just using a low-level language, because the low-level languages wouldn't be able to handle what you are aiming to achieve. So what I'm trying to say here is, again, the requirement actually determines the selection of your programming language. And like I said, in ERP, we are dealing with huge amounts of data. So only a high-level language like TROIA will be able to meet your needs. And for example, we said, I kind of mentioned the syntax and semantics part. But again, TROIA is an object-oriented language that contains concepts like classes, inheritance, and polymorphism. And again, yeah, it's an object-oriented programming language. And in most cases, the way that these concepts are very similar to the other languages. So if you are familiar with these languages, I mean, in no time you would know what is actually going on. You would easily figure out what is being told. But obviously we have slight differences, but the logic is more or less the same with the other languages. Only the implementations show some differences, but apart from that, if you have some knowledge about programming and your object-oriented programming, so TROIA would be added to your programming language, the programming language that you know and work with. So this is basically it. I'm not sure if I was a bit fast, but so this is so far what I'm trying to explain. And then obviously we will be getting more into detail. But as we discussed before, do you want to give a break here or do you want me to continue a bit more?
So I think you can, after this, let me just check the plan. I think you will be talking about the basic language elements and the data types.
Yeah.
So if it's not going to take too long, I think you can also cover them. Then we can have the break.
Well, because I was kind of thinking maybe not do not just kind of separate the concept from,
okay.
Because
absolutely.
After here, I just want to just I don't want anyone to get lost. So because just don't want to divide them too much. So if that's okay with everyone,
okay.
And then
okay.
after
So
that,
let's have it.
Yeah, it's back on, right? You can see my screen.
Yeah, absolutely perfect.
Okay, so we said that where we stopped, we said we are a high-level language, and TROIA is a high-level language, and we do have these object-oriented concepts like classes, inheritance, and polymorphism. For example, for classes, we have members. Members contain methods and can be derived from another class, and methods can be overridden, etc. So these are usual object-oriented concepts as well. And we also do support encapsulation. And then we have this concept called dialogues. Let's mention them quickly as well. We probably, all of us heard about this before, but dialogues in TROIA are user interface forms, literally. Visual side, where the user interacts with the system. And when we open a transaction, the structure that appears in front of us is a dialogue. And we design these dialogues in our TROIA IDE, like the front end side. We also do programming and everything, but we also develop the front end or the visual side in TROIA IDE as well. So how we do it, we build them by adding buttons or let's say text fields, tables, and then we give them functionalities by writing TROIA codes within them. And then like, for example, let me give an example here, where we make them functional by saying this button, when this button is clicked, call this function from this class. So basically, the dialogue is the visual side where the user interacts with the system in order to manipulate some data in the database. So we just kind of given the, it's like TROIA is a command-based language, and we implement these commands within these objects inside the TROIA IDE platform. And then we have reports. They are similar to dialogues, but they represent like different tasks, such as, for example, printing some selected data, like for reporting purposes. They are similar to dialogues. They look like dialogues, but the implementation and functionalities differ from the usual dialogue concept. And then we have transactions. In TROIA, or in canias in general, transactions represent the business level applications. So they consist of multiple dialogues, they consist of reports, components like custom components, different various tables. In other words, we can see transactions as a collection of interrelated dialogues that exchange data between them. So a collection of dialogues make up a canias transaction. And by tradition, canias transactions start with the abbreviation of the module, followed by the T keyword. Then we give them a unique transaction numbers. So for example, for Salty 01, SAL or SAL is for our module, sales module, and then we have the T, which stands for transaction, and then 01 represents the sub-branch of the transaction, which is the, in our case, for example, Salty 01 represents the sales management application. So here, now going into the more in detail of the language and everything, like in every programming languages, data types are really important concepts. And here now, I would also like to talk about built-in data types that we use in TROIA as well. We support most of the universally used data types like integer, decimal, string, Boolean. And apart from that, we also have more TROIA-specific data types like table, vector, and string builder. These are important concepts and very essential for high-level languages. It makes things a lot easier when you're dealing with so many codes. Like I said, as you know, this webinar is a bit like a crash course in TROIA. And I said, I want to give an idea about a bit of everything because it's such a widespread subject. So again, I highly, highly recommend, if you're interested in the subject, I highly recommend you to attend to one of our training sessions. And it's really enjoyable. If you're into that sort of stuff, you would definitely enjoy programming with TROIA. And by the way, before I forget, low-level types like byte, short, float, they are not supported in TROIA. But if you, let's say, if you need to be using these data types, we have different methods like type conversion, casting, that sort of programming methods. So if you need to be using these data types, we have different methods for those. So basically, this is like the hello world of the TROIA language. So from here on, we will get into the TROIA IDE and development tools and how we develop our apps using TROIA IDE. TROIA IDE is our integrated development toolkit, and it is embedded in canias. So when you have a canias system, depending on your user rights and everything, you also have access to TROIA IDE. So it's not a third-party application. It is embedded within the system. So I brought here TROIA IDE is the primary integrated development environment and tool where the TROIA projects are implemented. So here on this slide, you see the development environment screen. So I took a screenshot of the one of the examples. So this is the design template of an application called Company Cars that we use in our trainings. And let me explain what that does as well, so it gives you an idea. So in our end user training, we develop an app with the users, which is called Company Cars. I mean, we do other stuff as well, but normally we go through this exercise. And Company Cars example holds the data of the cars or vehicles that are being used in a company, like rental cars. Let's say you rented a car last year, and then you enter the information about these cars. And when you need to update these records, you just do this by using these fields. So here we have this field called SCCOM. This field holds the company data information, and SCNum field holds the vehicle number data. And all these fields are associated with a column in a table that we create beforehand, which I will show in a minute. So I said, first we do the hotline, and then we do the tables. We design the tables, and these tables, the columns, when user enters some values here, received by the interpreter, and then get allocated to the columns in the actual table in the data set. So this is like the basic screen of our TROIA IDE. So this middle part here is like an empty form. I will show you in a minute. We have this toolbox, and from here we literally just drag and drop these. We drag and drop these objects, and then we make them functional. This is basically what we do when we are developing TROIA applications. And then we will get back to the development concept, but before we do, let me just quickly mention this hotline concept as well. I said we start all our development and implementation with hotline. So whether you are creating a brand new application or you will be modifying an existing one, the system will always be asking for a hotline from you. And what is a hotline? Hotlines are literally documents or files that hold the information about what is the purpose of the development. So who is implementing the development? When is it being made? Is it for a customer? Is it a bug fix? Is it another implementation? Is it for training? So it almost serves as an ID card, literally. So just visualize it that way. You have, when you are going to the office, we have these ID cards and we swipe them, and the system there knows who is actually entering in the building, right? So hotline literally just handles that sort of operations. So they're also called change requests as well. So for any kind of development, system will always ask for a hotline from you, and we create these files in DevT06. So this is the screenshot of our DevT06 hotline management screen. So first thing first, we start with creating one of these. Here we enter like company code, sector code, which project this hotline is for, is it for a customer, and which module this development or modification is going to be made, and what transaction it is for, and what dialogue it's going to be used for. So these are the fields here that we fill in. And then we have, like I said a minute ago, what is the purpose of this hotline? Is it for a bug fix? Is it for training? Is it a new development? And then we give these hotlines priorities like normal, high, or just low, that sort of priorities. And then after that, we have to set, if we are going to start implementing the project, we have to set the status as started. So the system knows that this is an active running hotline file. So this is literally where this is the first start of our projects. We create these hotline files. And then after here, we define the tables. What we mean by table is the structure, metadata of the table. I might have skipped one, sorry. Tables which hold the field information, and we define them on the DevT01 transaction. And we have the, like I said, we do this on the DevT01. So one by one, we enter the columns that will hold the data, which will be receiving these values from the user. And we give them their return types, their lengths, etc. But this is a really important subject here. The tables that we create under DevT01, or the structures that we create under DevT01, does not get executed on the actual database. After we first define the structure, we literally define a template. And then after that, we execute a database script. And then only after that, the values that we enter get created in the actual database. So, for example, here is the screenshot of our DevT01 database browser screen. So as you can see here, let's have a look at this part. Here we have these fields. So again, this is from the example, company cars example. You know, let's say, assume that this is called company, right? This area, this is table name, but let's assume this is company, and let's assume this is the vehicle number, and let's assume that transaction is equal to vehicle type, okay? So I'm just literally defining everything that will be input here is going to be saved here in these columns, okay? So, and we have different field types for these areas, because, for example, on this one, it says string. So the client field here, or the company field here, is expecting the user to enter some string type value. And then we define the length, which means in this example is 3. So this is saying the user can only enter here 2 characters. Like, for example, in our examples, let's say we put company 01, which is 2 characters, right? Or so this is literally what we mean by field length. And then we have these fields called key field or not null fields, which literally corresponds to, you know, we have the mandatory fields in our applications that the user must enter in order to retrieve some values, right? So this is how we set these areas as mandatory key fields that some entry must be made. So this is what we literally identify them as. So now that we covered tables as well, we can get back to the IDE screen. First, and this is obviously, this is not that one, but when we go in the IDE first, an empty form appears in front of us. Then we simply drag and drop objects like these buttons on this empty form. And as I mentioned earlier, each of these objects can have their own specific events. For example, here, let's say we have this binocular icon, right? On its own, it's literally just a JPEG image. It's not a JPEG image, but just see it that way. On its own, it's just an icon. And if I don't give this icon any functionality, it just doesn't make any sense. What I do on this empty form, I drag and drop these control buttons, which we have like different options. We have like button objects, we have table objects, we have text field objects, and each of these objects can have their own specific events. So, for example, in this screenshot, as you can see, in this design phase, when I right-click on this button, it gives me two options like click and right-click menu. So this is literally saying, with this object, the things that you can do is to identify a click event or a right-click event. So you can either click this button or right-click this button. And then after that, accordingly, for click, I want this button to perform this operation. For example, here underneath, there's a code block. It's saying like clear all var list, which is the table name that we use for our virtual table. And for those who are familiar with programming languages, it says like if edu vehicles rec.listing, which is calling a method from a class called edu00 vehicles with these parameters here. So if these parameters are met, then enable the button. So which literally means make these buttons active. So we give functionalities in the TROIA IDE one by one. So just to give you an idea of overall idea of what is being done. And then after that, let me have a look. Is there anything else that I need to be covering here? So no, I think that's about it. And after here, let's mention classes. I kind of quickly mentioned before, but classes, as we know, are used for creating objects, variables, and methods. And then whenever needed, these created members or methods can be called within the program with certain parameters and some procedures. Just like we create dialogues, we can easily create classes in TROIA IDE, and then we can add methods within them. For example, here, this is the screen that appears when we attempt to create a new class in TROIA IDE. Again, like I said, it asks for a hotline from us, so the system knows who is creating this class. So this is literally, you are leaving your fingerprint here, and then you give your class a unique name and determine whether it is derived from a base class or not. And then you just give some short descriptions for your class and which module this class is being created for. And then you set the status as active or inactive. And again, underneath it says, similar to creating dialogues, classes can be created easily on TROIA IDE. And then like here, we just literally, this is actually the adding method to a dialogue. But like I said, as well as adding methods to dialogues, we can add methods to classes. So we literally right click on the class and then we say add method. And then from there, we start writing our TROIA codes. For example, here, as you can see, there's a method here. This is our class, which is our edu00 vehicles class. What I do to add a method to this class, I literally right click and select add method. And I give names, I give a unique name to this method called, in this case, listing. And then an empty page appears here on the IDE. And this is the editor where I actually start writing my TROIA codes. So TROIA codes literally look like this. This is an actual TROIA code block. This is, as you can see, we declare the parameters of the method. We declare its return types. We give them some unique names that are not used in system. And we define objects. And for example, an object named cellware is defined here. And cellware's value is being compared for different conditions and so on. And so this is literally how we implement methods in classes and in TROIA in general. So that is all actually I wanted to talk about the IDE part. And now I want to just start getting into the more overall side of things. So we have advanced TROIA concepts that we cover in expert trainings, which can be like string manipulations operations. We cover messages and alerts and how we implement them in TROIA. And then we cover concepts like complex select statements, some database operations, and then we cover type conversion and casting operations. And then we have file operations. And then we have this concept called custom TROIA components. So these are other concepts that we cover in expert trainings and some of them in end user trainings. We also have FTP operations that we can add to our developments. We have concurrency and multi-threading concepts. Then we have really complex web services concepts, and we do parsing XML and JSON concepts, HTTP operations, and then we have port communications. But like I said, these are all detailed information. But in summary, as we can see, TROIA is an enterprise software development and runtime platform with open source codes, which is really important. Again, I mean, when we're talking about open source, that means it gives you possibility to develop your or customize your own work, which is really a great opportunity for people who are using ERP systems, really. And TROIA is the main development platform for Canias ERP and other advanced canias4.0 technologies. TROIA has a unique structure that all its users can learn and start operating quickly, because we said it's a high-level language, and high-level languages are really easy to learn. And if you have some programming knowledge, it makes things a lot easier. It's a 4th generation object-oriented programming language, and it includes its own compiler, interpreter, and its own IDE, its own application server, its own clients, and we have other middlewares in between, like plugins and all that sort of stuff can also be included to the system. And if we get to have a look at what else does TROIA have to offer, we can say that TROIA is an enterprise software development and runtime platform with open source codes. TROIA is the main development platform for Canias ERP. Again, it's just, it is integratable, it is scalable, and it supports datetime and zone functionalities. And if we get to mention why TROIA in the first place, we can say it is separated from areas expertise. So, I mean, you don't have to really be a computer engineer to be able to develop an application in TROIA. I mean, it is good to know, it is good to have some pre-knowledge, but even if you don't know anything about programming, if you just attend a few classes, if you attend a few training sessions, you would actually have an idea of what is going on. And if you have some curiosity about the subject, a little bit at least as well, then you can actually start developing your own applications. It is an adjustable platform for technological developments. It's fast and cost effective, easy to learn and use, has open source code for its customers, and has wide integration of opportunities. It's a unique platform for all business processes, and it makes possible to manage whole software development lifecycle. Well, that is all I have to say for today, actually. I hope that I was able to just wrap it up, but let me just mention from the beginning how it actually works. What happens as a platform, we said we have the client side, which is you or the users that are accessing to the service. And then in the middle, we have the application server. And then next to it, we have the database. As a user, what I aim to do is to manipulate some data. And what I mean by manipulating data, I want to insert a new record, maybe a new, for example, a sales document can be seen as manipulation of data. Or I want to edit an existing document, which is also a manipulation of data, really. And then these data or the documents or all these files need to be stored somewhere, obviously. and so they, in the most traditional fashion, they get stored in databases. And we have this intermediate between the database and the client, which is the application server. And application server handles all these operations, as well as reading and running the TROIA codes that we just mentioned, and then generates responses to the users. So this is the most basic way, the mechanism the TROIA works on, or all the canias transactions actually work on. So, like I said, I just wanted to include a bit of this, a bit of that, to be able to give you a hindsight of how things are. I hope that I was able to make it as clear as possible. So this is all I got to say, really. And now I think we can get to the questions, if there are any. I would like to answer them for you if I can. And like I said, canias or TROIA is a wide space, an ocean of information. So to be able to explain something, you have to explain 10 other things beforehand, you know. So it's not like, okay, what is this? This is 4. It's not like that. To be able to explain 4, I need to explain 1, 2, 3 beforehand. So this is how it actually rolls. So like I said, that's it. I hope that I was able to make things as clear as possible. And from now on, I think we can start answering the questions.
Okay, let me just thank you, Levent, because it was an amazing summary. Although I had no previous development experience, or I don't have this background, but I'm quite interested in the codes and that kind of, like you said, if you're interested in, it's so easy to learn and use. So I'm that profile actually. And with this presentation, actually, I really understood a lot in terms of TROIA, the basics, and how it is connected with the product itself, actually, canias ERP. So thank you very much on behalf of the Academy, on behalf of all the participants. Thank you. So
thank you.
Let me just check the chat section, and also let's remind to all the participants that now we are in the QA part, and now we are ready to welcome all your questions. So where should I start? Okay, so we have a question from Şeymanur. I will just start answering, but then I will just direct the question to you. So it's great that you want to be a TROIA developer. So if you want to be a TROIA developer, so please join IAS Business Academy trainings. So this is a great start. But for the other part, so Levent, what do you say?
I totally agree. Like, I mean, being interested in something is the key to success, I'm saying. I mean, I'm not talking about success, but to gain the knowledge of that thing is, if you're interested in it, there's, you know, you would do it. Like I said, I would recommend to maybe, I'm not sure about your background in programming and everything, but if you do have some, that would be brilliant. Honestly, we have this 5 days end user training. What we do, we just, like I said, we just start with the tables and everything, and then we add on top of each other. We just create the tables, and then we start designing the front end. And then, like I said, we have these click events and everything. And in there, we implement our methods, and then we get to understand the syntax and how it actually works. We explain them one by one. We don't just simply copy and paste the code there. I write the codes. For example, I write the codes one by one, and I explain what it's actually doing. So let's say if there's like select asterisk from vehicles, I explain the users what it's actually doing. So it would give you a great idea to attend one of these trainings. So I highly recommend. And in 5 days, I mean, obviously you won't be how to say, developer in 5 days, but it will definitely help you to be able to make your own developments and create your applications. Because this is literally what we do. We create a running, a usable application at the end of 5 days. So if you want to start, we are here and we are more than ready to help.
Okay, thank you, Levent. So I will also I would like to ask something about it's something related with this question. So do you think that, or can we say, having previous knowledge in SQL or in Java, does it help to become a better TROIA developer or to understand TROIA better?
100%. I mean, definitely does help, but it's not necessary. But like I said, you know, it just makes things a lot easier, because if you do know about these languages, you probably do know about the algorithm, like algorithmic thinking as well. But TROIA as a language is not rocket science, which is not a bad thing. It's a brilliant thing, because this is where the programming languages are moving to. Because in the previous languages, like low-level languages, which I had to study myself as well, they were a nightmare, because even for the simplest task, you have to write like hundreds of lines of code. And I said, we have this concept called abstraction in TROIA. So what it does, you literally enter one keyword and the system knows what it needs to be doing. So you don't have to just say, write like long connection strings, which are always, you know, causes trouble and everything. But in TROIA, you don't have to deal with any of these things. Again, it helps, but it's not necessary. We just kind of, but basics, yes, you need to know some basics like data types, like integer, you know, that sort of stuff. If you do know what they do, because we actually don't overemphasize on these things, we just kind of mention them and just go to the next step. So that sort of pre-knowledge is required, but programming knowledge is not required. But if you do have it, it is definitely helps.
Okay. So thank you very much for the answer. I think this is the reason why I wanted to ask this, because I also have this question a few times from different participants. So I think it's a common one. That's why I wanted to just make it clear with you. So we have another question from Lucas. So is there an opportunity to integrate other web services like RESTful API or so on and so on?
Yes, it is possible to integrate web services like APIs or RESTful API. It is possible. We mentioned them how they are being implemented in our trainings. But yes, if the question is that, yeah, it is possible to integrate web services.
Okay, so do you cover the web services and integration in the basic level or in the expert level?
In the expert level, we do, yeah. We literally, in the end user, what we do is just like a standalone application we create with all the functionalities, with buttons, like fields and everything. But the concept that Lucas just asked is a bit extra, really. I mean, it is important, but it is for the like a basic running application. Like it's a functional application, it works. Even if you just kind of install it in your device, it will work. This is what we do. But these extras, like extra functionalities, we kind of go into details in expert training. And on top of that, we are actually going to be starting another level of trainings, because think about that way. TROIA is a programming language, and it is not possible to just give everything to you about a programming language in 5 days. But we actually still do a really good job. I mean, from the feedback that we get. But after expert training, we have another level. We haven't started it yet, but please bear in mind, note it down. It will be announced when we start actually giving these. It's going to be talking about the scenarios that we experience in the industry, like what sort of problems that we experienced and how we handled these problems and how we solved them. So we have end user, expert level, and then we're going to be adding another level, which is
professional
level, like,
professional
level. So yes, so these are the stuff that we cover in those levels, really.
Okay,
any other questions?
Yeah, any other questions? So we are still in the QA. If you have any questions, please just let us know. Share it through the chat section.
I wonder if it's a good sign or a bad sign.
You know, it's a good sign.
Good
sign.
Honestly, like I said, I mean, I have no idea about the participants' background. And, you know, we have people who have no knowledge about programming. We have experts here, I can see, you know, and then I have to boil it down to a certain level so everyone gets something from it. So I hope everyone was able to get at least even just have some idea about the whole subject. That I'm more than happy.
Yeah, I think you absolutely did this. Absolutely, as I said in the beginning, it was a great summary. Absolutely, this is not a complete training. That's why you can't cover all the details. And
Yeah.
I think also the participants knows this fact too. So it was a great presentation, and I think they got what they needed to.
Brilliant.
Okay, so let's just allow the
Mhm.
participants for a few minutes more for their questions. And if we don't have any other questions, then we will just move ahead to the end of the webinar.
And if you have any questions after the like about TROIA in general and everything, I can share my contact details with you as well. So you can just ask me questions there or through Zoom as well. I wonder if, yeah, as Sanjay shared now, here is my email address. Anytime about TROIA, about the trainings, about the language, the platform. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me at all. I'll be more than willing to answer your questions or help if I can.
Okay, it's perfect. Okay, so it seems like we don't have any new questions coming right now.
Okay.
So let's just go ahead with the final section of the session. So before we close and end the session, I would like to share that we will have another TROIA webinar with Levent once again. It will be the 2nd in December, and the second session, TROIA, with the same content, but this time it will be in Turkish. So on the 22nd of the December, we will have TROIA Integrated Development Environment webinar once again with the same content in Turkish with Levent once again. And thank you very much for your participation. I would like to wish you all a very healthy day. So please take care and stay safe and stay healthy. And this is the end of this session. And also, I would like to thank you once again, Levent, for all the amazing information. So if you have anything before we close, please share it.
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. It was good. I really enjoyed it. I hope the participants did as well. And I'll see you in 2 weeks' time for the Turkish version of the same training. And I wish everyone a good evening and a good week ahead. So see you all later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you then. So take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.